Very good morning to everyone. This is your host, Pramod Solanki, to those of you whom I have not met earlier. Let me first say that feel free to switch on your videos so that you can watch the interaction. It is only the audio that we will open at an appropriate time as we go along. So a very warm welcome to the third session of Leadership Series. And Leadership Series, as you know, in a nutshell, we are looking at it as a platform to learn about leadership, which again, as you know, is possibly the most important aspect for success of any enterprise. We learn about it from books, from research papers, by observing people in action, people in leadership role in action. And I think we can learn as much by listening to reflections of people who have been there, done that, and made their mark as a distinguished leader. Listening to their own reflections, experiences of their own leadership journey, I personally have found that are very enriching. And the experience of the past two series, past two sessions, and I'm very sure for this one, seems to reinforce that belief. So that's what this leadership series is about. For the third session, I must say we have someone who is greatly admired in various roles, as a corporate leader, as an author, as a teacher, as a management guru, a prolific thinker. Name it, and you have that capability in the gentleman we have today to speak to us. So I'm talking about Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan. A very good morning and a warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If I had known you're going to say such lovely things, I'm going to have got my wife to log in so that she could see what at least other people think of me.
No, I'm sure I speak for everyone here who have known about you. So, frankly, to a gathering in India, Mr. Gopalakrishnan doesn't require an introduction, but it's my proud privilege as a host to introduce you to him about some aspects that some of you may not know. 53 years of management experience, 32 years of board experience, over 100 keynotes in India and abroad. He has written books, not 1, 2, or 3, 16 books. And, we have some professors logged in here, Professor Salja Karwe, I see. So, people know what it takes to bring out one book. So 16 books, number of newspaper articles, and of course, regular writing in the field of management. A brief on the career. Like I said, he has been a corporate leader for 53 years, 31 years in Unilever and 17 years with Tata Group. He served in Jeddah as chairman of Unilever Arabia, in Bangalore as managing director of Brook Bond Lipton and vice chairman of Hindustan Unilever, and as executive director of Tata Sons. Apart from serving as a director on the Tata parent board, Tata Sons, he serves as an independent director and non-executive chairman of Castrol India, and also as an independent director of Hemas Holding PLC, Sri Lanka. Gopal mentors a few startups. And of course, he's actively engaged in both instructional and inspirational speaking. Talking about the teaching part, he has taught at number of B schools. SP Jain Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai, has invited him to be in executive in residence, as it is called, and he conducts courses there. One of the most unusual course that he has taught in B schools is called LWNT, learning what nobody teaches. Talking about early days, he studied physics at Kolkata University, engineering at IIT Kharagpur, and of course has attended advanced management program at Harvard Business School. So that's in very brief what Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan has packed in one life. And if I may also say that, for the first session in this series, we had Professor Pradeep Khandwala, who, besides being a former director of IIM Ahmedabad, is a renowned management scholar globally. Second session, we had Mr. Santrupt Misra, again a distinguished corporate leader beginning his career as an HR professional. We now have someone who blends these two. Person who has demonstrated leadership par excellence, having led such large and globally reputed enterprises, and not to miss out the fact that he's a very keen scholar of leadership. So of the 16 books that he has written, there are some 6-7 which are devoted to studying leadership of people who have distinguished themselves. So you have how Uday Kotak built a valuable Indian bank, one of the books, how Harsh Mariwala groomed Marico, how Deepak Parekh grew HDFC, how Anil Nayak built L&T's remarkable growth trajectory, how Kiran Majumdar Shaw fermented Biocon. So you have a leader and a leadership scholar rolled into one. So Mr. Gopalakrishnan, sir, let me not stand between you and the audience. I want to begin with the conversation, but before I throw in these questions, any comments to the audience and to us here?
You're asking for comments from the audience or from me?
I'm asking you, sir. Any?
Well, I feel greatly flattered about the nice things you have said. I have just had an ordinary life, which I've lived in an ordinary way, but I believe I have some extraordinary lessons to share. And I don't believe extraordinariness comes out of an extraordinary person. They come out of an ordinary person seeing extraordinary things in the ordinary things that have happened to him. And if I share one or two today, I'll be very happy. I'm sure all of you have ordinary experiences from which you draw extraordinary lessons. And I hope if a guy like me can share it, then you can also share it. And hope you can lead to more people who can speak on Mr. Solanki's webinars.
Oh, sir, thank you so much. So aptly put. So this is my first and favorite question to all the guests whom I invite for this platform. As a person, based on your recall of your early days, teenager or even earlier, and the person that you are today, I'm sure various things go into shaping a person. If you could share your reflections of some of the important things that have shaped Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, the person, the astute corporate leader that all of us know today.
As I said, I believe that people who influence you and shape you during your life are not necessarily famous people. They're ordinary people whom you've not heard of. So it may not make for a great conversation, because I can't tell you I studied in the same school as Rabindranath Tagore or Jagdish Chandra Bose, which is factually true, except they were about 100 years senior to me, and therefore is quite irrelevant. I would recall, in response to your question, some of the ordinary unknown people, unknown to you, who I think influenced and shaped me. And I'll focus on 4 of them very briefly. The first is my father. One of the 16 books I've written is called A Comma in a Sentence. And it's about tracing my family back to 1823. India is not a land with great records. So it was all verbal history. Because I used to interview my grandfather, and I had no idea I'll write a book, but perhaps I was a bit of a chatterbox, and learn about how life was in the early days. And my father left the village in 1931. He was not a graduate, and he took a small job as a stenographer in those days in Calcutta. And like a comma changes the meaning of a sentence depending on where it is placed, his life changed the trajectory of our family. That's why I called the book A Comma in a Sentence. I don't want to go on and on because all our fathers have been wonderful influences on us, but he's the first name I wish to mention. The second name I wish to mention is a Jesuit, a Belgian Jesuit, Father Jacques de Bonhomme. He was the principal of my college, St. Xavier's College in Calcutta. And the reason I remember him, apart from the fact that he's a wonderful teacher, is that he called me one day and said, in those days, I'm talking of the early 60s, 1963, 64. If you got a job in Fairley Place or Dalhousie Square in Calcutta, you could live your life, retire as a good boxwala on 450 rupees a month, or so we thought. He said, we have been asked by a very well-known company called McKinnon McKenzie to send 2 youngsters whom they can recruit as trainees. Would you like to be nominated? It's very prestigious, and I want you to succeed and take it seriously. So I said, of course, Father, it's a great honor. And I went along. And he wrote me a few years later. I didn't join McKinnon McKenzie, and I'll come to that story. But I finished my engineering and then joined Hindustan Unilever when they asked me for a referee, and I gave Father Jacques de Bonhomme. And he wrote them a 1-line testimonial, which is the finest testimonial, which I can still remember now after 55 years. He wrote to the personnel director of Hindustan Unilever. He says, with reference to your letter about your proposed recruitment of so-and-so, all I can say is that if you don't recruit him, it will be the biggest mistake of your life. And well, I got the job and I stayed on. But if you're looking for a way of being precise about what you want to say, I will always remember Father Jacques de Bonhomme. Then I told you I didn't take the job in McKinnon McKenzie. And I was sent through interviews right up to the managing director, a gentleman called Mohidas. And I was very surprised that as a young management trainee in 1963-64, I should be seen by a managing director. He said, son, you don't mind if I call you son? I said, no, sir, you're much older than me. He said, does your family need you to take the job? So I said, no, I never thought of that. My father never told me that. He said, in which case, can I suggest that you don't take this job? You're only 18. Study more. Because I developed my career in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. But you're going to develop your career in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And just being a graduate BSc will not work. So go and study more. But if you need the job, you don't have to come and tell me. Don't feel ashamed about it. You have the job. We'll pay you 450 rupees a month. I didn't take the job because my father was furious that I should have even given that impression. So I remember Mohidas so well. And I can go on and on, but I shall stop there just to say that people who have touched my life and influenced me are like gentle drops of rain from heaven. They have never been in the face, but just like the gentle drops of heaven fall on your cheeks and relieve you from the tedium of the shining sun above you, they have changed and influenced my way of thinking and life. And in return, I have tried to do something similar to younger people who come into my life as I grew older.
This is inspiring, sir. This is inspiring. Obviously, things have changed, looks like, from those days, but it's great to see that that thinking stays with you. Wonderful to listen to that. I go on to I can go on to the next one, sir.
Sure.
Thanks for sharing. That's deeply personal and great to hear that. So, 63, 64, if I remember correctly, 64, 65 is when these I am Ahmedabad, then I am Calcutta, etc. came up.
Correct. They just started.
Yes. So I think you entered corporate career when MBAs also would have started. And uh, so in Hindustan Lever, the kind of, beginning as an engineering graduate, the kind of levels and roles that you have moved, managerial levels, leadership roles, is something that inspires, managers of today, people who seek corporate career. So help us understand how this transition was from a individual contributor's role to someone whom people obviously respected a great deal, and organization felt that we should move you. If I recall correctly, you would be one of the youngest persons to hit the board of that time. Help us understand how this transition into a person of distinction as a leader got happened in Hindustan Lever.
The trouble with storytelling is that I can go on and on, but I'll try to be brief.
Sure.
But I always thought when I was 20, and many of us are like that when we were 20, I'm not a unique fellow, that we are in charge of our own boat. We determine our career. And we want to become vice president at this age, general manager at that age, director at that age. But I recall I had to study Hindi as my first language when I was in school, which was a great torture for me because we had higher Hindi. I think it was Jaishankar Prasad or Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, I've forgotten, who wrote a poem which I remember called Le Chal Mujhe Bhulawa Dekar Mere Navik Dheere Dheere.
Yes,
I can't remember exactly who's the author, but it is a very touching movie. Not movie, a poem which said that, somebody please guide my boat and take me where I belong. Of course, the thing went on into other poetic ecstasies. And that's really what's happened to my career. किसी ने बुलावा देकर मेरे नाविक को कोई नाविक मेरे नैया को लेके गए. I joined Hindustan Lever. They wanted me to come into management and marketing. And I said, I've studied computer science in IIT. I don't believe all this marketing stuff is any good. Or otherwise, I would have gone to an IIM. And I said this in my interview. I regret to admit it, but it's true. I said, this is the biggest hocus pocus studying management. Because management is all about hard experience and learning. So I will not go into marketing if that's the only job you have. Now, remember, marketing was the most prized job in Hindustan Lever,
yes.
even today.
Yes.
So the marketing director said to me, he said, fine, if that's your view, we'll take you in the computer department. But if you ever change your mind, come and see me. As it so happened, 5 years later, after I got some experience, I found the need to change my line of business, my profession. And I went back to him and he said, with great pleasure. And he put me back through the marketing drill. So that's how, and Hindustan Lever in those days was, I suspect it still is, it was an MBA school, frankly. I think in my first 3 or 4 years, I went through all the programs that you run in your MDP in the IIMs, finance for non-finance managers, marketing for non-finance, quality control, operations research, systems thinking, you name it, behavioral science. Because there was no MBA school. Those were the first MBA schools, as you rightly pointed out. So the boat was taken by a navik in some direction, and I went with the boat. So I claim very little credit. All I did was that as the boat moved along, I tried to row it as best as I could. And luckily for me, it delivered some results and things moved on. But if you ask me one overarching impression, that I can now recall, I'm not saying it guided me in those days, because when you're young, you're arrogant and self-assured to a fault. That happens to all of us. But when I think back, there are two things that I can clearly recall. That somehow, what the Gita teaches you, that you do your job and don't worry about the results, was a hidden voice, which I did not believe, but it was there somewhere. I missed one or two promotions here and there. I got into some wrong or not so enjoyable roles, but I did my best in those also. So that Gita came to me, uh, and I realized it only when my hair was gray. The second lesson that I would like to share, I'm hoping that maybe some young people are also listening
Yes.
or will listen,
Yes.
that I was very privileged because my father might have come from the village, but my generation, my brother, sister, and I are the first graduates in our family. Forget about MBA, graduates, just BA, BSc. My father wasn't a graduate, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm actually very proud of it. That's true for many of us. I doubt if your parents have studied as much as you. That's what progress is all about. But that privilege is one side of the same coin. The other side is called obligation. And I keep repeating to people that be fully conscious of your privilege, but just turn the coin. You cannot have a coin that always lands heads on top. Ek tail bhi hota hai. And I think those two principles are my naviks who took my boat in some direction. And I was a lucky passenger.
Great play of the person and the organization. And we have someone like you crafting an outstanding journey. There are still people talk about the kind of career you have had and impact you have made in the lives of people with whom you have. Incidentally, I had one of your team members as our colleague in L&T, Mr. Prasanna.
Right.
He had worked with you. So great to hear this, sir. And I wish we develop this balance little early on than when the hair starts graying. I think we could benefit a lot. So the other thing I wanted to hear from you is, when people are in the thick of their career in roles like director, MD, vice chairman of such large corporates, many people really, struggle to keep pace with the demands of the role. In your case, you kind of, managed your scholarly pursuits, when you were in the thick of your career in terms of major line responsibilities, leadership, top management responsibilities. So where did this motivation to put in that kind of time and effort, and what really kept you going in that track, and having produced 16 books today?
Two lessons I learned, like the gentle drops of rain from heaven. Nobody sat me down and did a coaching session with me. It just happened. And when a little drop of rain falls on your cheek, you recognize the fact that a little drop of rain has fallen on your cheek. The first is, my grandfather used to tell me that you think time is what is. He never used a wristwatch, by the way. My grandfather was in the village. And he said, I keep looking at the clock or the watch, and he would say, you think that is time? And I said, yeah, it's 10:30, and in another 1 hour, it'll be 11:30. He said, time is in your head. And he said, when you grow up, you'll find that if you get to have dinner with a very pretty girl, time goes away very fast. But if I take you to the temple to do the prayers, if the prayer lasts 1 hour, it seems to go on for 5 hours. So time is in your brain, it's not in your hand. And that's a very good lesson that I learned. The time is in your head and not on your wrist. Since Rajan Sinha ji worked in Titan, I think I should remind him. I always tell the Titan people that घड़ी हाथ पे लगा दिया, लेकिन असली घड़ी दिमाग में है, दिल में है. So that's the first lesson which I learned. The second is, when my father had retired, he had inherited from his father a number of religious texts in Tamil. And it was always his intention to study those texts after he retired. Then he told me one day when he was about 65, 70, and I was, of course, 20, 40 or whatever. He said, I'll tell you one thing. Don't wait till you retire. Because after you retire, you start to pick up one of these books, you feel drowsy, you go to sleep. You get up, you'll have lunch, you feel drowsy again, you go to sleep. Your brain cannot keep pace anymore. If there is something you really want to do, whenever that idea comes to your mind, start doing it before you retire. It's like catching, he told me, he said, if you want to catch a train, right, catch a running train so that you can get used to the velocity of the train. So I remembered this lesson, and at 55, I wrote my first book when I was still in service, as you say, in the thick of things. It required some discipline and organizing, of course. And I could ask Ratan Tata. At that time, I was working directly. I used to meet him every day. And he was kind enough to write the foreword for it, which is a great help because it's my first book. To get a foreword from Ratan Tata was a great help. So he sort of helped me to launch my writing career. And I found that if I followed the discipline, then I could transition from the ghadi on my wrist to the ghadi in my mind. Because time is what you make of it. And I think those were important influences. Casual conversation, not meant to be a coaching session with my grandfather, and a casual conversation with my father. And that's how these ordinary people have produced some extraordinary effects, the output of which I cannot judge because that's not for me to judge, but I think they've had some role in that.
Absolutely remarkable, sir. Remarkable. Since we are on the books, and you have written 16 of them, and in various facets of life, corporate life, is there any favorite among them, among these 16? And you want to talk about which one is it?
For me, my favorite book is the one that has sold the least.
I see. Oh, okay.
Right? My best book has sold 40, 50,000 copies in terms of sales numbers. And my worst book, or the one at the bottom of the pile in terms of sales, is sold 4,000 copies, is The Comma in a Sentence. Okay. But for me, my favorite is The Comma in a Sentence. Because it was a fantastic journey for me, personally, in my terms of my own self-awareness as to who I am, kahan se aaye, kahan ja rahe, to figure out how life in my village was. And my book, if you ever get to read it, is I sat like a fly on the wall of the train. And the train moved through the years from 1823 to 2014 when the book was published. And I was a little fly sitting on the compartment, I have covered in the book how my grandfather perceived the first electric steam locomotive that came to the village or near the village, They'd never seen a train in their life before. Because in 1865, 1870, the first train came. What happened to a post office? How a whole new profession of letter writers came up in the village. Because people could not read and write, but they wanted to still send a postcard to their dear one somewhere else. So, like we call software coders today, who are really letter writers for the computer, between the computer and the manager. These people were letter writers. And all of us have seen in our own cities, wherever you have grown up, cities or villages, that outside government offices, there'll be some guy sitting on a little stool who will fill up your money order form. He'll fill up, we've all seen this.
Yes,
but
yes.
I found it extremely exciting and very touching personally. So it's my favorite book, A Comma in a Sentence.
So this is inspiring, sir. There was a request from one of the persons in the audience that he couldn't hear the name of the book correctly. So Professor Salja Karve was nice enough to respond. It's a comma and a sentence. And I think while reading 16 would take some time, but this is one book I promise will get read before this month ends. I'm inspired to read this for sure. It only shows that what sold most may not necessarily be the most impactful. And here is a live example. So,
by the way, I should just say to you that when I wrote this comma in a sentence, I initially wrote it. I was in bed. I had some surgery and I was stuck for 4 months. And I thought I'll read it as a typed manuscript, word processor mein karke. It will be kept for my grandchildren. I never expected to publish it. But Rupa, who published the book, actually produced a printed copy, which has a beautiful, I think it's beautiful, cover design by my wife, where we took the main street of our village in Tanjavur, and that appears on the cover. And that book got read by many people from Punjab, from Bengal, because once it's in a bookshop, some people pick it up. Only 4,000, but still, that's not a small number from my point of view. And I got very touching letters from people, as I said, from Punjab, UP, Bengal, saying, this is the story of my family, identical. Except that instead of saying that name, we had this name. And the most touching thing that happened was I got a call. Allow me to tell the story because I must tell you why it's my favorite. I got a call one day from a young man who lives here in Bombay in Chembur, saying, my grandfather has read your book. He's a Tamil, by the way, and he's very keen to meet you. I said, how old is your grandfather? He said, he's 94. I said, Jesus, I can't tell your grandfather to come to my office. So if you tell me where you live, I'll call on your grandfather. At 94, it's not fair to make him come here. He said, no, he's quite fit. He'll come. So the grandson brought the grandfather in his car and they sat in my office. And the grandfather came straight to the point. A sprightly man for that age. He said, I come from the same village as you. Right? And he said, you have traced all these people. Who did that person marry into? Back in 1890. I said, bloody hell, I don't know. I just know the person's name. It's it's my father's grandmother's something. He said, I want to find out because I'm writing my family story and there's a missing jigsaw. And I want to know whom Komalam married. I said, and something very funny. I rang up my aunt, who's the oldest surviving member now. She's now, at that time, she must have been 92, 93. I said, Aunt, this gentleman is about your age and he's asking me where Komalam married. She said, I remember Komalam. I used to be a young girl. She used to live in this little lane. And I got them to talk to each other. And it was a cute conversation, a 94-year-old man talking to a 92-year-old lady about some Komalam who had died 70 years ago, So there are nice little connections, human connections that come to you, which I found. That's why I like the book.
Amazing, sir. Thanks for sharing, really. This is great. Part of your something to cherish. Coming back to now more, contemporary issues of management, you have written on this issue of employee engagement. I've seen some of your articles, and I'm sure you will have a perspective. So when you think of engagement levels of workforce in India, obviously things could be much better. So what is your take, and what do you think is the significant missing piece if we have to really get to some level there?
15 years ago, I didn't even know what's employee engagement. I think it's something I learned much later in my career. And I have visualized in my head, this is my own, I'm sure it's influenced by things I've read and other people have told me, that our body has an immune system, that all of us know. And there are 3 layers of the immune system. Any immunologist can tell you that, and COVID-19 has taught us all of that. The first outer layer is the physical layer, your skin, for example, right? It prevents things from getting into your body. So that's the physical layer. The second layer, which you can't see, which is below the skin, is your genetic system, your genetic layer. You got proneness to diabetes, blood pressure, something. You don't know which ancestor has given it to you, but there is a particular proneness to that. And the third is the adaptive layer. So there is the physical layer, the genetic layer, and the adaptive layer. In the same way, a company also has an immune system. The physical layer is called employee engagement. The genetic layer is called company culture. And the adaptive layer is called positivity. So when you walk into a factory or anything, you can see कि माहौल कैसा है. And employee engagement is a reflection. When you talk to people in that company, if they say, यार हमारे company में ऐसा ही होता है, you talk to some guys who work in large governmental type of organizations, and they will speak not so well of their company. So that is employee engagement, the physical layer. Now, coming to your question, otherwise I'll end up giving you a lecture on the.
No, this is wonderful articulation, sir. Please go ahead.
Employee engagement is a problem everywhere in the world, by the way. Yeah. It's not just an Indian thing. Right. You people are, many of you are HR people. You get Towers Perrin and many of these
Gallups and all of that. Huh?
And you get the last 15, 20 years data. You can download it. It's on the computer. Everywhere in the world, it's declining. Now, this, like, to me, is like saying somebody's got a quality index for a motor car and the quality is declining year after year. I call this the black elephant. It's not a black swan, but it's a big elephant in the room. So I call it a black elephant. Right? It is sitting there in front of every manager that employees are getting more and more disengaged from their company. Now, who's doing something about it? And so when I got exercised about this, when I was in service, I said, how do you measure employee engagement? And then, of course, there are various pundits for every Veda, If you want to know which Upanishad, then you have to get the right pandit. Right. There is a Dvivedi, there's a Trivedi, there's a Chaturvedi. We got one Trivedi on our program today.
Yes.
So I found one Dvivedi or Trivedi who told me that it's easy to measure employee engagement. There are techniques. And we implemented it in Tata. Every company measures its employee engagement. Each company took its own initiative. From the center, we only guided them. The first thing that I think companies should do is to understand the concept and to measure it. Because otherwise, you can't even get started. Right. I'm appalled to see many companies don't even measure employee engagement. So they don't even know there's a problem. It's like saying, I had 10 ppm defect, it's gone to 100 ppm, it's gone to 200 ppm, but I don't even know about it. Then secondly comes the ways to increase employee engagement. And I'm not a great believer in all this Friday dressing, wear jeans and dance on the shop floor before you go home of the weekend, TGIF, TG, all that stuff. Employee engagement comes out of insaniyat. And we are living in a world which is turbulent. It's not that we are all bad people, you and I, but insaniyat is declining. And because we are all so ambitious, our ambition overtakes our insaniyat. If you deal with people as human beings, and I am guilty, I don't know about you guys, of not having always dealt with people as human beings. Kabhi rob dikhana, you get angry about something, you speak sharply to somebody. And I've had a number of experiences which have told me that my behavior should improve. So long as it's occasional lapses and you can have a self-correction, that's fine. But by and large, people should remember you as a very warm leader rather than a very efficient leader. Whereas I spent my career thinking people should remember me as an efficient leader rather than as a warm leader. Both antar hota hai dono mein.
Sure. This is remarkable, sir. This is remarkable. And while, like you said, there can be flashes of mistakes, but self-correction, you obviously took good care of it. And that's why people remember you as the leader that they remember you as. Little bit now to draw from your time, 31 years at Hindustan Unilever. Business press writes about Hindustan Unilever as a leadership factory. The sheer number of people who stood out as leaders within Hindustan Unilever, and even after they left and they went elsewhere, they really made their mark. So please share with us what is it about that organization that is able to, grow such leaders?
It's good for me to simplify it and put it in a telegraphic way rather than give you a big bayan, which one is tempted to do because one has got 31 years in experiences. But I think the overarching hallmark of Hindustan Unilever is it does not know how it does it, but it has institutionalized people orientation. If I went and interviewed, people say, yeah, we have this system, that system, annual appraisal, annual falana, dikana, coaching. You've been through that. We have personnel review. Those are systems and processes. But it got to add up to that word insaniyat. Ultimately, that's where it matters. And Hindustan Lever has institutionalized it. You will not survive in Hindustan Lever if you don't have people orientation and insaniyat. And there'll be the odd aberration. I mean, everything has an exception. And I think that is the core thing about what's happened in Hindustan Lever. They do the right things without knowing that they're doing the right things. And that's ecstasy. That is the best thing.
Absolutely.
It is like saying your Gayatri mantra without knowing what benefits you're going to get out of it. And in the process, you say, well, maybe the Gayatri mantra helped me. I think Hindustan Lever I'm sure it's not the only such company, but I can only talk about companies that I know rather than companies that don't. And Hindustan Lever has flaws, by the way, because nothing is without flaws. I mean, I have flaws, you have flaws, we all have flaws. So it admits its flaws and then tries to do something about it, or is not able to do anything about it. Tatas have flaws, but Tatas have enormous strengths. So at the end of the day, it's not the balance sheet is not your credits and debits, but how quickly you recognize your debits and reduce your NPAs, and how unconscious you are of your credits. People get very conscious of their credits. Ki humne ye kiya, wo kiya. That doesn't help. I would say people orientation is the strongest part in my memory of Hindustan Lever.
And you would think that it has got institutionalized over it's a history, and it continues to getting reinforced by current leadership?
I think so. Because, people count that there are 200 CEOs all over the country who are ex-Hindustan Lever.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether the 200 is right. It may be 189, it may be 209, but it's a very large number. The second thing is that there is a bhaibandi. You've not come to just work. You've come to make a social group. How many McKinseys have that? Some other companies, Tata Motors has it. Indian Hotels people have it. There are some companies that have it. And it is very nice to be able to say, I worked in a place for 7 years and then I moved on because I got something else, but I still love that company. That is employee engagement.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's like your school or college,
Yeah.
If you say, yaar, wo din itne bure the, I want to forget about it, then that's not lagan. But if you can still go back and say, as an alumni of IIM or IIT, I'll still give my life for it, I'll still do something for it, that is lagan. Employee engagement is lagan.
So, and if people really want to care for it, they should nurture that aspect, is what you're saying.
Correct. In other people.
Sure. While I still have a few of my own questions, but I see people wanting to ask. So let me just, Mr. Mubarak Ali says, thank you for your insights and extending sincere thanks to organizers. What CEOs get wrong about vision and how to get it right? So he has put many of them, but you want to respond to this in the interest of time?
What CEOs get wrong about their vision? I'm not clear what the question is.
What CEOs get wrong about vision and how to get it right? Mr. Mubarak Ali, you want to articulate? I can unmute you. Yes, Mr. Mubarak Ali, can you go ahead and place your question?
Yeah, good afternoon, Nandal. Thanks for the opportunity, sir.
Yes.
Vision in the sense, suppose the long-term vision, short-term vision, sir. Take an example of current, due to the COVID things, due to the sustainability things, it will differ from time to time, sir. So how do they need to align with their vision?
I think this management gurus have developed a fetish to a fault about this vision mission stuff. It is useful, but I don't place too much. I like to look at practical things around me. And balancing short-term and long-term, the best example I can give is of my wife when she was raising our family, and my daughters who have been at home raising their families, not raising, but delivering their babies. And, I have had a chance to see. A woman is the best example of managing short-term and long-term. And if all of us can become women in managing short and long-term and stop talking about vision, it is better. Why? When a woman has the baby, that baby is crying. There are short-term issues. Rota hai, burp hona hai, etc., etc. Nappy change karna hai, raat ko neend nahi aata hai. But the mother never stops dreaming about, meri beti dancer banegi, musician banegi, lawyer banegi, etc. A mother represents that while the short term is occupying her immediate attention, her mind, because the vision part is in the head, never ceases. That she's got dance class mein bhi bhejna hai, French class mein bhi bhejna hai, squash class mein bhi bhejna hai. So I believe that if we can all behave as mothers raise their children in our jobs, we'll have short and long term sorted out. We don't think we need have anything to learn from our wives or our daughters, but I have learned a lot. Unfortunately, a bit late. So I'm suggesting it to you guys in case you're at a stage in your career where it's the best coach you can have. Just watch your wife or your daughter. And if you tell them that, they'll feel even happier. And that makes for a nice, happy family.
Yeah, I think another example of how we learn extraordinary things from the ordinary people and things around.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is wonderful, sir. It may not be a very neat question, but because there are a lot of variations, you worked for such a long time in possibly one of the most reputed global multinational organizations. And, by now we have good number of Indian multinationals, and with significant global presence, etc., etc. Is there something to learn for Indian multinationals in terms of people practices in particular?
Oh, yes. I think one of the great weaknesses of Indian industry is people practices. There are exceptions, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying all Indian companies are bad at it. Don't get me. That's not what I'm saying. But the amount of people orientation, Indian companies do people orientation intuitively. ये मेरा भतीजा है, इसको नौकरी दिलाना है. That's an intuitive form of people orientation. आखिर मेरा बेटा है. आखिर इनके साथ रिश्ता रखना है. We have to have a relationship. So there's a lot of intuition, which I am not at all against. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Multinationals do their people orientation through process. If Indian companies can put more process and retain their vasta, as they call it, in Arabic we use the word vasta. In Chinese they call it guanxi. So if we have guanxi or vasta, or what we here will call contact in India, and it can be accompanied by a process orientation, then Indian companies will do very well. Indian companies, if they can engineer their people processes without losing their intuition, then it will be fantastic. Many Western companies have processes, but they lack intuition. So in this, left brain and right brain have to be matched.
This is interesting, sir. Something very much along these lines. Late Mr. Kurian Varghese of Amul fame had said this, that India in its intuitive sense has great strength, and if it can blend the best of practices and technologies that we can adopt from the world, that's when it'll have its place in the sun. So very much along these lines. I think that's a great point, and that at least people here are, I'm sure, taking note, and through the YouTube that it'll get watched, I'm sure people will kind of make the best of this lesson. I have one or two questions here, which I will take. But, as a scholar of leadership, I named some of the books where your focus was in studying the leadership of those individuals. Share with us whatever you think will be, useful for a group like this from, your own study of leadership of these 5, 6, and I'm sure others as well, outstanding leaders. What would you like to share?
I'm not a scholar of leadership, it's
6 books, that's your
yeah.
humility.
The 6 books that you see here right behind me over here,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That came out of an involvement with academics. Now remember, I'm not an academic, so if you call me a scholar, I'm shining in the light thrown by some professors at SP Jain, where I go as an executive in residence, and I'm not used to attending faculty meetings. Faculty meetings struck me as aimless chit chat compared to corporate meetings where there's a problem and you assign who's going to do what about it. But faculty meetings have the advantage that they are also shooting the breeze and thinking of ideas. So one day we raised the question, what is the difference between a good company and a great institution? And a lot of chatter began amongst the people in the faculty room. And people referred to Tom Peters and Bob Waterman and Jim Collins and a number of other names. All those books I have in my library also. Padha bhi hai. I said, where is the Indian formula? Why do you have to go to Tom Peters? And are Indians slightly different? Not vastly different, but slightly different. Like a tanpura in a music, it has to be tuned each time. You can't just take one tanpura and go around the world, just start stringing it. That led to the research that we did. And I call it the output of the research. The academics have written research papers on it. I call it the MBA matrix. And that appears in each of the 6 books. If you buy this, then in the appendix, you'll find the research methodology. And the MBA doesn't stand for Master of Business Administration, but for Mindset, Behavior, and Action.
This is awesome.
And we likened, at least in my mind, I don't know about them, I likened MBA to the Ganga. There's a Gangotri somewhere near Rishikesh, Haridwar, which starts as a small trickle. And that Gangotri, from that Gangotri, it becomes in the Doab region of UP, it becomes behavior. That mindset of the Gangotri, that water becomes like the behavior, which everybody can see. But it really gets into action by producing energy and torrents of energy when it gets into the Sundarbans and the Delta region. So the mindset, if your mind is, I have to make money quickly, by hook or by crook, and people do have mindsets like that, then that becomes behavior and action, and then it becomes a scam or whatever, So we trace the mindset, behavior, and action of institution builders. And then I wrote to 10 CEOs who, according to the criteria that we set out in the book, it's all written, had built institutions. It is not about the individual, but about the company. Have you institutionalized it, or after your death, will it go? And 6 of them responded positively because, it's a bit of a pain if you're working in a company as a CEO to participate in an academic institution's research, But luckily, I have a relationship with some CEOs, having been there myself. So they agreed, which is some unique blend of practitioner and academic. If SP Jain had written on their own, I don't know if these people would have agreed. But so thoda mix and match ho gaya. And we did 700 hours. I actually kept a log sheet of research, of talking to them, interviewing them, transcribing and writing the books. And it is through that we came to this MBA matrix. And to answer your question, what is the Brahma mantra that has come out of it?
Yes.
Like all Brahma mantras, I can whisper it into your ear, but it will just be another mantra. But I think if you read the book, you'll get the hang of it. There were 3 essential characteristics, or 4 essential characteristics. First was people orientation. They were all intuitive, but the signs of putting it into a process and institutionalizing it was also happening. The second was balancing short term and long term, which also we have talked about, so I will not repeat it. The third is critical thinking. Critical thinking, by that I mean thinking of non-obvious solutions to obvious problems. If you watch your TV in the evening, A, you'll go insane, and B, your eardrums will burst, and C, they find obvious solutions to obvious problems. So that's why it's better not to watch TV if you want your sanity to stay with you. But critical thinking is the art of finding non-obvious solutions to obvious problems. These 3 were there in every single institution. And we have explained through examples and so on. And there are 5 others. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of them.
Right.
You said give us 3 or 4. I've given you the main.
No, this is great. And actually, these nuggets that you're sharing has only aroused interest, most certainly in me, to make sure that we don't miss out some of the books that you have written, and in some of them. In the case of Bonsai Manager is something I thoroughly enjoyed and read because I happened to be there when the book was released. But I have missed quite a few, and I'm very keen that I read
just by way of interest. There is something called Living History India, LHI. This is by a former TV anchor called Minnie Menon, who so much in love with history that she has set up Nuggets of History, which comes out with bulletins and this and that. And I'm doing a show with them now on Live History of Makers of Modern India's Entrepreneurial System. Where we're going to cover some of the stuff that I've just been talking about.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. So, sir, since you had said in the beginning that I don't mind a few minutes extension, so let me take advantage of that. There are 2 questions. One, I see our senior HR colleague, Akhil, who has raised his hand. But before that, Akhil, MBN Rao has been in the queue. So instead of reading his question, I am unmuting him. MBN, please go ahead and place your question to Mr. Gopalakrishnan.
Sir, it's awesome to listen to you all the time. And I read quite a few of your books, and they are very, very, I think, relatable. We can see it all the time happening around us in real world, in the corporate world. I wanted to ask you, something like you wrote your first book at 55. And you relate so many experiences. I just want to understand that in a day-to-day life, so many things keep happening to us. How do we actually remember? How do you actually relate to all these things in the various forms that you do? Do you follow any process, or is it your innate capability which just dawned and you just discovered and then you reflect on it? Just a little bit of a curiosity for me.
I can give you a very profound answer, but that will be
simple answers.
that will be an untruth. But because right now I can make anything sound profound, But one of the things I realized as I was getting older, I think all of us seem to get wise only when we get old. When it's a bit too late, I wrote an article once called The Bald Man's Comb. And all of us, after we go 60, we seem to acquire a comb when we are bald, I realized that there are 2 kinds of wealth that we acquire during a 30, 40-year career. And one is a certain amount of financial wealth. If you lived well and earned well, you may have a certain amount of financial assets. And unless you have made so much money that you don't know what to do with it, you would probably leave it for your children in some charities in your village or your community or whatever. If you made so much money, then you would put an endowment in or some activity. That has the characteristic that you will not take it away with you when you go up on the final day, that it will diminish if it is not used well, and it is finite. That's the nature of financial assets. There's a second asset that we are not even conscious that we have it because it's not put on the balance sheet. And that's called experiential asset. Nobody's valued it and put it on the balance sheet. But our experience teaches us so many lessons, but we don't know how to translate that into something interesting for somebody else. So, Mr. Rao, I realized that the richest place in the world is Chandanwadi. If you live in Bombay, Chandanwadi is a crematorium, because people have 30, 40, 50 years experience and one day they are taken there and it's all burnt. And I said there must be a way to take ordinary living experiences and make them into extraordinary lessons. And so I consciously tried to do something about it. That's how my first book came out, The Case of the Bonsai Manager. And of course, each time I try to do it better and differently. It requires some effort because it is like saying, मेरे पास कपड़ा है लेकिन उसको सीने का कोई तरीका नहीं है. सीने का तरीका सीखना चाहिए. And I've tried to do that, Mr. Rao. I hope you like the book on L&T and it's factual.
Yeah, I did, sir.
This is awesome. This is great to listen to, sir. Akhil, all yours. Please go ahead.
My old friend Akhil.
Hello, Gopal. Good to see you, sir.
શું ખબર છે મજામાં છો?
એકદમ ચાલે છે, બરાબર છે. Gopal, you have become more outstanding than you were as outstanding 34 years ago when we knew each other. Tell me one thing, 700 hours of research that you have done only for this set of books would have given a lot of insight to how do you inculcate this behavior rather than just know about it. Because one of the things we find, yesterday I saw a Forbes list of top 10 earners, and shamefully, I wouldn't put many of them as institution builders. So there are two questions, Gopal. One, should we really aim for institution building, or Chandanwadi is the example that you gave, that they take away with them what they take? But if we want to build institution, what recommendations would you have in terms of inculcating institution building habits and behaviors, especially in mid-management when they start growing up? Any recommendation or suggestion, Gopal?
Akhil, it's a deep question and the time available is short. But let me say that the mindset, the Gangotri, has to be tackled.
Right.
You see, it's not a criticism of the training programs. I've been the beneficiary of Hindustan Unilever and Tata's training programs. I've conducted them. I've learned from them in my earlier part of my career. But we try to influence people's ways of thinking, but we don't try to influence their attitude enough. Mm-hmm. And I think if you want to deal with the Gangotri, see, when the Kaveri starts in the right in the beginning, that's when you have to get to it. I found that what HR people often recommend, that recruit people for attitude and train them for skills, is a very good way. I mean, I'm choosing a practical way, which doesn't sound, philosophical. Many people recruit for skills and try to train for attitude. Mm-hmm. They don't listen to the HR guys. I mean, there are enough HR gurus who will tell you the opposite. But the HR guys are not always necessarily listened to. I think if you want to build an institution, it requires the use of the intellect and not the mind. Mm-hmm. And in our Vedanta, it says the mind is what Daniel Kahneman would call system one thinking, the first quick reaction. And the intellect is what Daniel Kahneman would call system two thinking, the reflective thinking. And I have personally, I'm just sharing with you because you asked the question, found one exercise very helpful, which I do. I used to do, I've probably at my age stopped doing it now. In the morning, when it is very quiet and calm, and I get up early, I think about all the things, human interactions I had yesterday.
Okay.
It could be They are usually routine. I met my wife, we had a cup of tea together. I said, gave some check for the school children's, for the fees of the school, of the child. I went to office, I said, good morning to my secretary. I said, good evening to somebody. You know, that's what stays in your head, the transactional part of your life. But I started to say, what was the reflective part of the transaction? Because every transaction has two parts, a transactional part and a reflective. And you know, I was ashamed that I couldn't even remember the reflective part.
Oh.
Try this tomorrow morning. Try to think of what your wife told you, but what was she not telling you? But she meant.
Right.
You'll find what a hopeless husband you are. And when you go to your wife and admit it, she says, I've been telling you this for the last 30 years.
You never listen. You never
listen. I've never met a wife who thinks that her husband listens to her. Conversely, also, by the way, I'm just saying husband and wife, it could be the other way around. So this is not a gender point. Our problem is that we learn to focus on the transactional part, but not on the reflective part. Call it system 1, system 2, call it mind and intellect, call it left brain and right brain. And I think it is a challenge to HR people in a company to slightly shift the emphasis. It's not that you must stop thinking with your right brain, with your left brain, but to slightly reorient it. And it's a challenge. I don't have any easy answer other than to share this insight with you guys.
But are you seeing a trend change in last 50 years?
I'm seeing people have become far more transactional.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You know, compared to my younger days, I think because pace of life, technology, you can't have a conversation with a person, including in your own family, without they're looking at their mobile phone. I'll give you one example of this. Just one, so that I don't hold up. Mr. Tandon was the chairman of Hindustan Unilever when I joined.
Yeah.
And he had this practice of calling young trainees, as he would call them, for lunch, once in a year. We had very few, compared to today, much fewer trainees. And to be called by the chairman to the 5th floor of Hindustan Unilever house
was a big thing.
Was not a big thing, It was almost soul destroying, because you didn't know what to wear, how to eat. There were forks and knives, and the carpets were so thick that you'd fall into the carpet, So we went, and we were only 5 of us at that lunch.
Oh.
And that tells you how many trainees Hindustan Unilever used to recruit in those days. Today must be 50 or maybe even more. Mr. Tandon had a very slow and deliberate way of speaking.
Talking, yeah.
Those of us who interact with him remember this. Whereas we were all, talking. At one stage, one of my young colleagues, kept on answering every question because, he must have gone to an IIM who said you get marks for, what do you call it?
Class participation.
CP. Okay. So he must have been told you must be first off the mark, and he had an answer to everything. And then Mr. Tandon asked him, he said, Mr. Singh, how many years do you have? He said, sir, I have 2 years. Said, how many mouths do you have? He said, I have 1. He said, what's the surface area of your ears compared to your mouth? He said, sir, maybe in the ratio of 1:2. He said, so 2 raised to the power 2, how much does that make it, Mr. Singh? He said, 4. He said, you must listen 4 times more than you speak.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Now, this transaction was a terrifying moment in my trainee days.
Right.
Because to listen to the chairman tell you this, I went into the carpet and I said, yahi pe doob jayenge, isse nikalta nahi. But it tells you what I mean by reflective and transactional. Today he would say, please keep quiet, let the other guy speak.
Yes.
Then tell me which had an effect.
The first one.
I still remember the story.
After so many years, yes.
After so many years. And later on, when I became a director, Mr. Tandon came home and I said, Mr. Tandon, do you remember the story? He said, no, young man, I don't. But It's true. But it's true what I said. If I said it, it's true. So that's what, gentle drops of rain from heaven.
Very true, Gopal. Thank you so much, Gopal. Thank you.
Thank you, Akhil. Keep well.
Thank you.
This is awesome, Gopal sir, if I may take the liberty of calling you this. And, when you have someone like Mr. Gopalakrishnan, I think the conversation can go on. There has been so much of learning from the ordinary things of life, things and people in life, to extraordinary learning from them. This has been an awesome session in terms of learning for all of us. And I think what I sincerely hope I speak for everyone who is here. I think what it has also done, this conversation, it has kind of triggered curiosity, most certainly in me, and I'm sure in many others, that there is so much to learn from our day-to-day living that we kind of gloss over. And most certainly, this conversation has aroused an interest, a deeper. The titles of the book I knew when I have read cover to cover, and what this conversation has certainly aroused an interest that there is a lot of real substance lying there, the essence of the life and learning of Mr. Gopalakrishnan in these books, and I sincerely hope that I will take advantage of those, and I'm sure many others. So thank you so much, sir, from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thank you, and all of you for being so patient. I'd just like to close by saying what my Sanskrit teacher told us in school one day.
Okay.
He said, आप लोग हमको उपाध्याय कहते हैं, उसका क्या मतलब होता है? उपाध्याय, somebody else is teaching you. He said, इसका एक और भी विपरीत स्वाध्याय, अपने आप सीखो, अपने से सीखो. You're your best teacher. And that swadhyaya has stayed in my head. And reflection, nothing but swadhyaya. So I just thought I'd mention. Thank you all very much. You've been a wonderful audience, and I hope it's been useful for you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again, and to each one of you for having joined. And we hope to have you in the next session a month down the line, and we'll share the details. And on behalf of all of you, to you, sir, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.